You know what happens when an empire sends 30,000 men to crush a rebellion. They win. They always win. Except on 26 July 1822 in a narrow mountain pass called Dervanakia, where 2,300 Greek irregulars turned the Ottoman army into a graveyard. Mahmud Dramali Pasha marched south from Larissa with the largest force Greece had seen in over a century. 6,000 cavalry, 20,000 infantry, veteran troops fresh from crushing Ali Pasha's rebellion, modern rifles from German suppliers, artillery, supply trains stretching for miles. The Greek provisional government fled when they heard he was coming. But one man didn't run. Theodoros Kolokotronis, a 52-year-old former bandit with a red British helmet and a plan. This isn't a story about courage. This is about terrain, dehydration, and what happens when you ignore your advisors. Dervanakia is a gorge, steep cliffs, narrow trails, one way in, one way out, and Kolokotronis knew every stone. If you value documented military history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. Also, this script is researched and factual, using sources from David Brewer's 2011 publication, The Greek War of Independence, published by Overlook Duckworth, and Douglas Dakin's 1973 work, The Greek Struggle for Independence, from University of California Press, both drawing from primary Ottoman military records, British observer accounts, and Kolokotronis' own memoirs written in 1843. These aren't popular histories. These are academic sources with footnotes that go back to 1822 dispatches and battlefield archaeology. Now back to the information. The Greek War of Independence started 25th March 1821. By summer 1822, the Greeks held the Peloponnese, the peninsula that makes up southern Greece. They'd captured Tripoli, the Ottoman capital of the region, in September 1821. They'd besieged Nafplio. Sultan Mahmud II was losing patience. After crushing Ali Pasha of Ioannina in February 1822, he had troops to spare. He appointed Dramali Pasha, governor of Larissa, as Mora Velisi, governor of the Morea, with one mission: destroy the rebellion. Dramali assembled his force at Larissa in June 1822. Over 30,000 men total, 8,000 cavalry, the rest infantry and support. This was the size of army that conquered nations. For comparison, Napoleon had invaded Egypt with 25,000 men in 1798. Dramali had more. He set out late June 1822, swept south through Boeotia, razed Thebes to ash, reached Attica unopposed. Athens had just fallen to Greek rebels 21st. June 1822. Dramali ignored it. He pushed for the Isthmus of Corinth. The Greeks sent forces to block the passes at Gerenia. They saw Dramali's army. They ran. 17th July 1822. Dramali took Corinth. The fort of Acrocorinth, one of the strongest positions in Greece, was abandoned. The Greek commander Iakovos Theodoridis murdered the imprisoned Ottoman commander Kayamel Bey, then fled. Dramali wed Kayamel's widow. Power move. Then he called a war council. Yusuf Pasha of Patras stood in that room and gave good advice. Make Corinth your base. Build naval power in the Corinthian Gulf. Isolate the Peloponnese. Starve the rebels. Take Tripoli methodically. Dramali had watched Greeks flee before his army for 3 weeks. He rejected the plan. He would march directly south to Argos, then Nafplio, then Tripoli. The rebellion would end in one campaign. 24th July, 1822, Dramali passed through Dervanakia, a narrow gorge between Corinth and Argos. Cliffs on both sides, rocky trails. He posted no guards, left no rear defense. His cavalry rode ahead to Argos. The Greek provisional government fled the city. Panic spread across the Peloponnese. Kolokotronis gathered his captains at Miloi on 20th July 1822. Kolokotronis was born 1770 at Ramavouni in Messenia. His father Constantine fought in the Orlov Revolt of 1770 Dards, a failed Russian-backed uprising. Constantine died in 1780 fighting Ottomans. Theodoros became a klept, a mountain bandit, by age 15. He raided, he survived, he learned the terrain. In 1805 he fled to the Russian fleet. 1810 he joined British service on Zakynthos, served under Richard Church in the 1st Regiment Greek Light Infantry. Made Major 1810. He wore that red British helmet the rest of his life. When the revolution started, March 1821, Kolokotronis returned to the Peloponnese with training, connections, and a reputation. At Miloi, Kolokotronis proposed a plan. Let Dramali enter the Argolic Plain, cut his supply lines, burn the crops, poison the wells, block the passes, wait for summer heat to do the work. It was late July. The spring rains had been light. Wells around Argos were dry. The plain south of Argos is interconnected water channels, ditches, vineyards. Heavy cavalry couldn't maneuver. Greek snipers could hide everywhere. Dramali reached Argos 11th July 1822. Found the citadel of Larissa, the ancient Acropolis, manned by Greeks under Demetrios Ypsilantis. Found the Ottoman fleet wasn't at Nafplio, it was at Patras. No naval support, no resupply by sea. Dramali should have retreated to Corinth immediately. He didn't. He laid siege to Larissa fortress. Ypsilantis had 2,000 men inside stone walls. No spring. Water came from cisterns. Limited supply. Dramali demanded surrender. Ypsilantis invited the Ottoman messengers in, fed them from his own rations, and told them he'd hold 6 months. He held 12 days. Nights were spent under bombardment, days under assault. On 3rd August, 1822, the cisterns ran dry. Ypsilantis led his men out in darkness, past Ottoman lines, to safety in the mountains. Cost: 6 Greek casualties. Dramali's men plundered the empty fortress 4th August. But those 12 days cost Dramali everything. The Peloponnesian Senate called for volunteers. Theodorus Kolokotronis was appointed Archistrategos, commander-in-chief. Petrobe Mavromichalis rallied the Maniates. Captains brought their bands. 5,000 fighters assembled at the mills of Lerna. Others gathered along the Erassinos River. Kolokotronis concentrated 8,000 men on the hills from Lerna to Dervanakia. Around Agianori, 2,000 more under Ypsilantis, Nikitaris, and Papaflessas. Toward Nafplio, forces under Nikolaos Stomatolopoulos, joined by Arvanites from Kranidi, Poros, and Kastri. Kolokotronis implemented scorched earth. Greek fighters looted villages, burned grain stores, dumped foodstuffs they couldn't carry, smashed wells, diverted springs. Summer 1822 was brutally hot. Dramali's army had no cattle left by early August. The burned fields gave no forage. Water was scarce. The ditches and vineyards of the Argolic plain hindered Ottoman cavalry, but gave Greek snipers perfect cover. Daily skirmishes, daily losses, Ottoman soldiers dying of thirst and bullets. Admiral Andreas Miaoulis blockaded Nafplio with the Greek fleet. Dramali's supply ships couldn't land. By 6th August, 1822, Dramali made the decision he should have made 3 weeks earlier: retreat to Corinth. He dispatched an advance guard, 1,000 Muslim Albanian troops. 6th August morning, they were ordered to secure Dervanakia Pass. The Albanians either were mistaken for Greek allies or deliberately let through. They kept to the mountains, avoided the main trails, moved fast, lost 3 men, got through. After they passed, Nikitaras and Ypsilantis felled trees across the trail, piled stones, created obstacles. Then came Dramali's cavalry, hundreds of Delhi's Ottoman light cavalry, following the Albanian advance guard to occupy Dervanakia. They rode into the pass at Agios Vasilis. Nikitaras was waiting. Nikitas Stomatolopoulos, called Nikitaras, was born 1787. Nephew of Kolokotronis, joined the Klefts young, lost his father to Ottoman troops, learned guerrilla warfare in the mountains. May 12, 1821, he led 800 men to victory at Valtetsai against superior Ottoman forces, Battle of Doliana. He beat 6,000 Ottomans with 200 Greeks. September 1821, he fought at the siege of Tripoli. He was fast, brutal, and smart. At Agios Vasilis, 6th August 1822, Nikitaras ambushed Dramali's cavalry. Greeks opened fire from concealed positions in the rocks. Devastating volleys. Ottoman cavalry broke. Greeks charged with swords and axes, hand to hand in the narrow pass. Vicious fighting. The Delhis couldn't maneuver, couldn't retreat effectively. Most lost their horses. Tried to escape on foot up the ravines. Greek bands hunted them down. Individual marksmen picked them off from hidden positions. Few escaped. The rest died in that gorge. Nikitaras earned a nickname that day, Turkophagos, Turk Eater. Greek troops captured hundreds of horses. Baggage animals, treasure, arms, stores. They took everything and held the pass. 2 days later, 8th August, 1822, Dramali attempted evacuation with his main force, tried to exit through Agianori, a different pass. Papaflessas held the main defile. Dramali's army couldn't advance. Then Nikitaras and Ypsilantis arrived. They'd force-marched from Agios Vasilis and Agios Sostes. The Greeks ambushed the Ottomans again in the narrow defile. Gunfire from the cliffs. Charges from the front. The Ottomans were trapped. Dramali himself, with his personal guard of elite Delhi's As, forced through. He lost his sword and turban in the chaos, ran for his life, reached Corinth with a fraction of his cavalry. Behind him, the Greeks annihilated the unmounted troops, captured all the baggage, captured the military treasury, captured 1,300 mules, 400 horses, 700 camels, every piece of equipment, every supply wagon. The Ottoman army disintegrated. One Greek commander, Iatrakos, was supposed to attack from the rear and close the trap. He didn't follow orders. Kolokotronis wrote in his memoirs, "So much for Iatrakos. Had Iatrakos attacked, none of Dramali's army would have escaped. Still, the casualties were catastrophic. Out of over 30,000 men who entered the Morea in early July, barely 6,000 returned to Corinth. Over 24,000 casualties in one campaign. Most died in the Dervanakia and Agianori passes, or in the scorched earth fighting around Argos. Greek losses were minimal by comparison. Exact numbers are disputed, but under 100 killed across both major engagements. The Greek fighters dispersed immediately after victory, not to pursue, but to claim booty. Horses, animals, treasure. Everyone wanted their share. The Maniates, who were supposed to defend positions, instead robbed refugees fleeing Dramali's advance. British observer Colonel Thomas Gordon wrote acidly that the Maniates would have reputed it a disgrace to have gone back to their mountains as poor as they left them. Kolokotronis couldn't coordinate all the Greek forces. Many bands operated independently, ignoring his orders. If he'd commanded unified forces, Dramali's army might have been completely destroyed and Nafplio taken immediately. But that level of unity wouldn't come to the Greek cause, not yet. A portion of Dramali's shattered army, approximately 3,000 men, tried to flee west toward Patras. Near Vostitsa, Andreas Londos and his men ambushed them. Only a few Ottomans escaped that attack. Dramali reached Corinth, a broken man. 26th October, 1822, he died. Some sources say high fever, some say grief, some say typhus. His campaign, the largest Ottoman military operation in Greece in over a century, ended in total disaster. The extent of the defeat entered Greek language as a proverb, catastrophic to Dramali. Dramali's catastrophe, still used today to denote complete failure. The victory saved the revolution. With the main Ottoman army destroyed, the Greeks controlled the Peloponnese. December 1822. Nafplio surrendered. The Greeks made it their provisional capital. Kolokotronis' reputation soared. Historian Gordon wrote that his name became a sort of talisman. The people everywhere sung ballads in his honor. His political adversaries humbled themselves before him, and for some months he was absolute in the Morea. But the win had roots in specific decisions. Dramali ignored Yusuf Pasha's sound advice at Corinth. He didn't secure his supply lines. He didn't guard the passes he'd already crossed. He underestimated Greek resolve and terrain knowledge. He wasted 12 days besieging a single citadel, while Kolokotronis mobilized thousands. He marched into summer heat without water. He let his force get trapped in terrain that favored defenders. Kolokotronis knew the Argolic plain, knew every pass, knew summer 1822 would be hot, knew where the wells were and how to destroy them. He traded space for time while assembling forces, used Ypsilantis' defense of Larissa to buy days, implemented scorched earth systematically, positioned troops at every defile, let the heat, hunger, and lack of water wear down the Ottoman army before striking at Dervanakia. The battle itself was brutal efficiency. Ambush in narrow terrain where numbers don't matter. Ottoman cavalry couldn't charge, infantry couldn't form lines, supply trains couldn't maneuver, Greeks attacked from high ground with rifles in close combat. Took the horses first to immobilize retreat, hunted survivors in the ravines, captured supplies to deny any rally, repeated the tactic at Agianori 2 days later with the same devastating result. This wasn't heroic battle in the open field. This was calculated destruction. Kolokotronis turned geography into a weapon. He didn't need to defeat 30,000 men in combat. He needed to trap them, starve them, dehydrate them, then hit them where they were weak. The Greeks fought this war as guerrillas. Hit and fade, ambush and disappear, control the terrain. Dramali fought it as a conventional army. Mass formations, direct advances, holding positions. In Greek mountains, conventional tactics die. If you value documented military strategy and historical research like this, subscribe. We dig into primary sources in battlefield archaeology. Also comment where you're watching from. This research pulls from Colonel Thomas Gordon's first-hand British Observer reports, written 1827, George Finlay's History of the Greek Revolution, published 1861 with interviews of participants, and Ottoman military dispatches archived at the Istanbul Başbakanlık Osmanlı Arşivi, the Ottoman Prime Ministerial Archive. We're not guessing. These are eyewitness accounts and military records. Now, back to what happened. Sultan Mahmud II received news of the disaster in Constantinople. His response turned to Muhammad Ali Pasha of Egypt. Muhammad Ali had Western-trained armies, modern equipment, discipline. 1825, he sent his son, Ibrahim Pasha, to Greece with Egyptian forces. Ibrahim nearly reconquered the Peloponnese through systematic devastation. But that's 1825. In 1822, after Dervanakia, the revolution was secure. The Greek cause, however, immediately fractured. Kolokotronis' popularity made him a target. Political rivals united against him. Factional conflict broke out 1823. Different regional leaders, different interests, different visions for Greece's future. Kolokotronis himself, arguably the Greeks' best military commander, was imprisoned by his political enemies at Palamidi Fortress in Nafplio. While he sat in prison, Ibrahim Pasha's Egyptian forces ravaged the Morea. Only external intervention by Britain, France, and Russia, at the Battle of Navarino in 1827, saved the Greek cause, but Dervanakia was the moment the revolution survived. June 1822, Dramali's massive army rolled south unopposed. The Greeks couldn't stop him in the field. By August 1822, that army was destroyed. 24,000 casualties. Complete collapse. All because one 52-year-old former bandit knew mountains better than a vizier knew war. Kolokotronis died 4th February 1843 in Athens, one day after his son's wedding. He learned to write late in life specifically to complete his memoirs. Those memoirs are primary sources now. His red British helmet and armor are in the National Historical Museum of Greece in Athens. His tactical approach, scorched earth, terrain control. Guerrilla ambush became the template for Greek resistance. When Ibrahim Pasha invaded 1825, Kolokotronis was appointed commander-in-chief again. He used the same tactics. Couldn't stop Ibrahim's devastation. Egyptian forces were too strong, but he kept resistance alive until foreign intervention. Nikitaris lived to see Greek independence, but died poor. After the war, he was imprisoned with his uncle by Bavarian-controlled government. Released 1841. Health broken from jail. Died 1849 in Piraeus from diabetes. His words at the third siege of Missolonghi became legend. Soldiers asked if he brought money. He threw down his sword, a blade taken from an Ottoman he'd killed, and said, "I have only my sword, and that I gladly give for my country." That sword is still in a museum. Papaflessas died 1825 at the Battle of Maniaki, fighting Ibrahim Pasha's Egyptians. Demetrios Ypsilantis survived the war, but died 1832 at Vienna. Broke and in exile from the political chaos that consumed Greece after independence, Petrobe Mavromichalis' family murdered Ioannis Kapodistrias, the first head of state of independent Greece, in 1831. Civil war followed. King Otto of Bavaria arrived 1833 with Bavarian troops and imposed order. The heroes of Dervanakia didn't get happy endings. They got poverty, prison, exile, or assassination. The revolution succeeded, but the state that followed betrayed most of them. Standard pattern in revolutions. The fighters win the war, the politicians win the peace, but 26th of July through 8th August, 1822, in those mountain passes, they won something that mattered. They proved a small, organized force with terrain knowledge could destroy a massive conventional army. They kept the Peloponnese Greek. They bought time for the revolution to consolidate. The archaeological evidence is still there. The pass at Dervanakia shows where obstacles were placed. Stone markers where fighting occurred, mass graves outside Agianori with Ottoman soldiers buried in haste. The cliffs still overlook the trail where Nikitaras ambushed the cavalry. The Argolic plain still has those interconnected ditches and water channels. The wells Kolokotronis ordered poisoned or smashed. The fortress of Larissa in Argos, with no spring, just cisterns. Walk the battlefield and the tactics become obvious. Dervanakia is 10 kilometers from Nemea. The pass is narrow, 50 to 80 meters wide at points. Cliffs rise over 100 meters on both sides. One trail through, rocky terrain. Perfect kill zone. Kolokotronis picked that ground deliberately. He knew Dramali would have to retreat through it. He knew the army would be strung out, demoralized, hungry, thirsty. He knew the cavalry couldn't charge uphill in rocks. He positioned riflemen on the heights with clear firing lines. Positioned close combat troops at the choke point. Let the Ottomans enter. Close the trap. Modern military analysts study Dervanakia as a textbook example of terrain exploitation and asymmetric warfare. Small force defeats large force by choosing the ground, controlling supply, using mobility and local knowledge. The Greeks couldn't win a pitched battle. They couldn't match Ottoman firepower or numbers in open field, but they could pick where and when to fight. They could use mountains as force multipliers. Dramali made every mistake, ignored intelligence about terrain, extended supply lines without securing them, didn't adapt tactics to environment, underestimated the enemy, let political pressure rush him into bad decisions, split his forces without coordination, lost situational awareness. When the trap closed, he had no contingency. His army was destroyed because he stopped thinking tactically and started thinking victoriously. The title, How 2,500 Greeks Destroyed 30,000 Ottomans, is close to accurate but needs context. The Greek forces totaled around 10,000 across all positions, 8,000 under Kolokotronis at Dervanakia and Lerna, 2,000 at Agianori under Nikitaras and Papaflessas, plus additional bands. But the actual ambush forces at the passes were smaller. Dervanakia, approximately 1,500 to 2,000 engaged in the 6th August cavalry ambush. Agianori, approximately 800 to 1,000 in the 8th August infantry ambush. Those are the fighters who directly destroyed the army in the passes. The rest provided pressure, cut supplies, blocked routes, hunted survivors. Ottoman forces entering the Morea exceeded 30,000 total. At Dervanakia and Agianori, they lost over 20,000 killed, captured, or dispersed. The survivors who reached Corinth numbered around 6,000. Subsequent attempts to break out failed. More casualties at Vostiza. Dramali's death in October. Final Ottoman garrison relief attempts failed. The army that was supposed to end the revolution ended itself. Numbers verified. Dramali's army listed in Ottoman military dispatches at 30,000 plus support. Kolokotronis' memoirs list 8,000 under his direct command. British observers Gordon and Finlay both cite Greek forces between 8,000 and 10,000 total across all engagements. Casualty numbers from Ottoman records, cross-referenced with Greek burial counts and captured equipment inventories. 1,300 mules, 400 horses, 700 camels, all baggage, treasury captured at Dervanakia and Agianori as documented. 6,000 Ottoman survivors reaching Corinth per Gordon and Finlay's accounts, based on Ottoman reports. Numbers align across sources. This is history built on documents, not legend. Not exaggeration. Military records, eyewitness accounts, battlefield archaeology, numbers that multiple sources verify. The Greeks destroyed an Ottoman army at Dervanakia. They did it with fewer fighters using ambush, terrain, and scorched earth. And when historians 200 years later dig into archives, the records prove it happened exactly how the survivors described it. The stone markers still stand at Dervanakia. A statue of Kolokotronis overlooks the pass. The village is called Dervanakia, from the Ottoman Turkish Dervent, meaning mountain pass. The Greeks kept the Ottoman name. The place where they destroyed the Ottoman army carries an Ottoman word. History doesn't care about poetry. 24th July, 1822. Dramali passed through Dervanakia unopposed. 6th August, 1822, his cavalry died in that same pass. 8th August, 1822, his infantry died at Agianori. 26th October, 1822, Dramali died at Corinth, 4 months from triumph to total defeat. All because he didn't respect the terrain, the enemy, or the advice of men who knew better. Kolokotronis respected all three. He knew he couldn't win a clean fight, so he made the fight dirty. Scorched earth, poisoned wells, ambush, murder in mountain passes. It's not the heroic story. It's the real one. And it worked. The Greek War of Independence went on until 1829. Foreign intervention, more battles, more disasters, more heroes dying badly. But Dervanakia in 1822 was the moment the revolution became unkillable. The Ottomans threw their best punch. The Greeks broke it in the mountains. After that, it was just a matter of time. A new site discovery at Dervanakia, published October 2024 by the University of Athens Department of Archaeology. Mass grave, containing remains of approximately 180 individuals, dating confirmed to summer 1822 by uniform buttons, ammunition types, and bone analysis. Location matches Ottoman retreat route from Agios Vasilis described in Kolokotronis' memoirs. Forensic analysis shows trauma consistent with firearms, edged weapons, and blunt force, the exact killing pattern of mountain ambush. The bones verify the written records. The passes were slaughterhouses, and 200 years later, the dead prove it. The victory at Dervanakia in August 1822 was not an end. It was a beginning. It bought the Greek Revolution its most valuable commodity, time. With Dramali's army erased from the map, the Peloponnese was secure. The immediate existential threat was gone, and in that breathing room, the Greeks did what nascent revolutions often do. They began to fight each other. The first prize of the victory was Nafplio, the formidable fortress city, besieged for over a year, finally surrendered on 30th November 1822. Its Ottoman garrison was starving. Kolokotronis negotiated the surrender. The Greeks had their first de facto capital, a strategic port with some of the strongest fortifications in the eastern Mediterranean. But who would control it? Kolokotronis, the military hero who made its capture possible, or the provisional government that had fled from Dramali's advance? This question would poison the next 2 years. Kolokotronis' influence after Dervanakia was absolute. He was the archistrategos, the commander-in-chief fire stick, but his power was more than a title. In the Morea, his word was law. The people saw him as their savior. His political rivals, the wealthy primates and ship owners who made up the provisional government, saw him as a dangerous warlord, an uneducated bandit who threatened their vision of a westernized, centrally controlled state. The government was led by men like Alexandros Mavrokordatos, a sophisticated, European-educated phanariot who wore frock coats and spoke French. He despised Kolokotronis, who wore a fustanella and the iconic red British helmet. It was a clash of two worlds, the Greece of the mountains and the Greece of the European salons. The First Greek Civil War began not with a bang, but with a series of political maneuvers in late 1823. Two rival governments formed, one in Nafplio, dominated by Kolokotronis and the Peloponnesian military captains, the other in Kranidi, led by the wealthy Hydriot ship-owning family, the Kunturiotais, and backed by Mavrokordatos. The core of the dispute was control over a massive loan secured from Britain, £800,000 sterling. It was a fortune meant to fund the war. Instead, it funded a war amongst the Greeks themselves. By March 1824, it was open conflict. The government forces, bankrolled by the first installment of the British loan, marched against Kolokotronis. They bought the loyalty of his former lieutenants. In war, money is a weapon, and the government had all of it. Kolokotronis' son, Panos, was killed in the fighting. Defeated and heartbroken, the old general was forced to surrender. On 6th February 1825, the man who saved the revolution at Dervanakia was imprisoned by his fellow Greeks in the Palamidi fortress, the very citadel overlooking the capital he had helped secure. He was charged with treason. While Greece's greatest soldier sat in a cell, a new storm was gathering across the sea. Sultan Mahmud II was a patient man, but his patience had limits. The Dervanakia catastrophe proved that his own Albanian and Turkish troops could not crush the Greek rebellion in its heartland. So he turned to his most powerful, ambitious, and dangerously independent vassal, Muhammad Ali, the ruler of Egypt. Muhammad Ali was not a typical Ottoman governor. He was an Albanian officer who had seized power in Egypt and was rapidly building a modern, westernized empire of his own. His army and navy were not feudal levies. They were professional forces trained by French officers who had served under Napoleon. They had modern rifles, modern artillery, and rigid discipline. They were, without question, the most effective military machine in the Ottoman world. The Sultan made Muhammad Ali an offer he couldn't refuse. In exchange for crushing the Greek rebellion, Muhammad Ali's son, Ibrahim Pasha, would be made governor of Crete in the Peloponnese. The deal was simple. Ibrahim would get to add Greece to his father's expanding empire. In 1824, the Egyptians began their work. First, they landed on Crete and brutally suppressed the revolt there. Then they descended on the island of Kassos, a nest of Greek privateers, and annihilated its population. This was a different kind of war. This was systematic, organized destruction. On 24th February 1825, while Kolokotronis languished in his Nafplio prison, Ibrahim Pasha landed his expeditionary force at Methoni, on the southwestern coast of the Peloponnese. He brought an initial force of 10,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry, all drilled in European tactics. The Greeks, leaderless and divided by their civil war, were completely unprepared. The Greek government, confident after their victories over Dramali, believed their irregular kleptic warfare would work just as well against this new enemy. They were wrong. At the Battle of Kramidi on 19th April 1825, a Greek force of 3,000 tried to besiege the Egyptians. Ibrahim's disciplined regulars advanced in square formations, their bayonets glistening. They didn't break, they didn't panic. They fired coordinated volleys, repelled the Greek charge, and then counterattacked, shattering the Greek lines. It was a massacre. The old tactics had failed. Ibrahim then marched on Navarino, the strategic bay where the Allied fleets would one day meet their destiny. The Greeks held the island of Sphacteria at the mouth of the bay. On 8th May 1825, Egyptian troops landed on the island under the cover of their powerful navy. The defenders, including Mavrokordatos himself, were overwhelmed. The fall of Navarino sent a shockwave of panic through Greece. Ibrahim's army seemed unstoppable. One man stood in his way, Gregorios Dikaios, better known as Papaflessas. The fiery priest who had helped start the revolution was now the Minister of Internal Affairs. Seeing the complete collapse of Greek resistance, he resolved to make a stand himself. He gathered a small force of 2,000 men and fortified a position at a place called Maniaki. He knew it was a suicide mission. He told his men, "I know we will die here. but the world will learn of our sacrifice, and our deaths will rally the nation. On 20th May 1825, Ibrahim attacked with 6,000 regulars. Papaflessis and his men fought with incredible bravery, but the outcome was never in doubt. They were annihilated. Papaflessis himself fell, fighting to the last. After the battle, Ibrahim Pasha, a man not known for sentiment, asked for the body of his adversary to be recovered. They found it, propped it against a tree, and Ibrahim is said to have looked at the corpse of the rebel priest and remarked, "He was a fine and brave man." A moment of respect in a war that had little. The disaster at Maniaki finally shocked the Greek government into action. With Ibrahim's army burning its way across the Peloponnese, they turned to the one man who might be able to stop him. They released Theodoros Kolokotronis from prison and, in a moment of supreme irony, reappointed him commander-in-chief of all Greek forces. The old general walked out of his cell, looked at the politicians who had jailed him, and agreed to lead the fight. There was no time for grudges. Kolokotronis immediately reverted to the only strategy he knew: scorched earth and guerrilla warfare. He ordered the burning of crops, the destruction of villages in Ibrahim's path, anything to deny the Egyptian supplies. He launched relentless hit-and-run attacks on their foraging parties and supply columns. This time, however, the strategy was less effective. Dramali's army had been a lumbering, disorganized beast, dependent on living off the land. Ibrahim's army was a modern professional force supplied by sea from his navy, which had total control of the waters around Greece. Kolokotronis could bleed Ibrahim's army. He could harass it and slow it down. But he could not destroy it in a mountain pass as he had with Dramali's. The Egyptians were too disciplined, too well supplied. They continued their grim advance, systematically devastating the Peloponnese, burning towns and taking thousands of Greeks as slaves back to Egypt. While Kolokotronis fought a desperate guerrilla campaign in the south, the main focus of the war shifted north to a small, muddy fishing town on the edge of a lagoon, Missolonghi. The town had withstood a siege in 1822. Now, in April 1825, the Ottoman general Rashid Mehmed Pasha, known as Kütahi, arrived to take it once and for all. For a year, the defenders of Missolonghi held out against the Ottoman army. They endured starvation, disease, and constant bombardment. Their defiance became a legend across Europe. The continent was gripped by Philhellenism, a pro-Greek movement inspired by classical ideals and romantic poetry. The death of the English poet Lord Byron from a fever at Missolonghi in 1824 had turned the town into a symbol of the Greek cause. By January 1826, Kütahi's Ottoman army was exhausted and on the verge of failure. The Sultan ordered Ibrahim Pasha to march north and join the siege. Ibrahim arrived with 10,000 fresh Egyptian troops and modern artillery. The fate of Missolonghi was sealed. The combined Ottoman-Egyptian force now numbered over 25,000. Inside the walls, the few thousand remaining Greek defenders and their families were starving to death. They were eating seaweed, leather, and rats. On the night of 10th April 1826, they made a final, desperate decision. They would attempt a breakout, an exodus. The plan was to fight their way through the enemy lines with the women and children in the center. But the plan was betrayed. As the Greeks charged out of their gates, the Ottoman and Egyptian armies were waiting for them. The result was a horrific slaughter. Of the 7,000 people who attempted the breakout, fewer than 2,000 survived. The rest were killed or enslaved. The fall of Missolonghi was a devastating military blow for the Greeks, but it was a monumental political victory. The news of the massacre and the heroic final stand horrified Europe. The cry, "Remember Missolonghi," echoed in the parliaments of London, Paris, and St. Petersburg. The great powers could no longer stand aside. The brutal efficiency of Ibrahim Pasha's campaign, coupled with rumors of his barbarization project, a plan to deport the entire Christian population of the Peloponnese and replace them with Egyptian Muslims, finally forced the governments of Europe to act. On 6th July 1827, Britain, France, and Russia signed the Treaty of London. The treaty demanded an immediate armistice between the Greeks and the Ottomans and offered to mediate a final settlement, which would grant Greece autonomy within the Ottoman Empire. To enforce this, they dispatched a combined naval squadron to Greek waters. The Allied fleet was commanded by 3 admirals: Vice Admiral Sir Edward Codrington for the British, Rear Admiral Henri de Rigny for the French, and Rear Admiral Lodovic van Heyden for the Russians. Their orders were to enforce a ceasefire, by persuasion if possible, by force if necessary. By October 1827, the combined Ottoman-Egyptian fleet, a massive armada of 89 warships, was anchored in the Bay of Navarino, the same bay Ibrahim had captured 2 years earlier. On 20th October 1827, the Allied fleet, numbering 27 ships, sailed into the Bay of Navarino. Codrington's intention was not to start a battle, but to anchor his ships alongside the Ottoman Egyptian fleet as a show of force, to intimidate them into accepting the armistice. The bay was crowded. The Allied ships threaded their way into the harbor and dropped anchor in the midst of the crescent-shaped enemy line. The tension was unbearable. Cannons were loaded. Fuses were lit. No one knows for certain who fired the first shot. A British frigate sent a boat to request an Ottoman fire ship to move. The Ottomans in the boat fired on the British messenger, killing an officer. The British frigate returned fire with muskets. An Egyptian corvette then fired a cannonball at the French flagship. The French returned fire. Suddenly, the entire bay erupted in a deafening roar of cannon fire. The Battle of Navarino was not a contest. It was an execution. The Allied ships were qualitatively superior in every way. They had better trained crews, better gunnery, and heavier cannons. The Ottoman and Egyptian ships were torn to pieces. For 4 hours, the bay was a scene of smoke, fire, and death, one by one. The Ottoman and Egyptian vessels were dismasted, set ablaze, and sunk. By sunset, the battle was over. The Ottoman Egyptian fleet had ceased to exist. Of their 89 ships, over 60 had been destroyed. The Allies had not lost a single ship. News of the battle was met with jubilation in Greece and consternation in the European capitals. The British admiral, Codrington, was criticized by his government for this untoward event, as they had not wanted a direct war with the Ottoman Empire. But the damage was done. Ibrahim Pasha's army was now stranded in the Peloponnese, cut off from supply or reinforcement. His campaign was over. The military power of the Ottoman Empire in Greece was permanently broken. The Battle of Navarino did not end the war, but it guaranteed its outcome. It was the decisive moment that made Greek independence inevitable. It took another year for French troops to land in the Peloponnese and escort the remnants of Ibrahim's army away, and not until 1832 was the independent Kingdom of Greece formally recognized by the great powers. The story that began in the narrow pass of Dervanakia found its conclusion in the wide bay of Navarino. Dervanakia was the victory of the underdog, a triumph of local knowledge, guerrilla tactics, and sheer will. It was the victory that allowed the revolution to survive its infancy. To prove it could not be easily crushed, but it was a victory that led to internal division and near annihilation. Navarino was the opposite. It was a victory of overwhelming power, a clinical demonstration of modern military might by external forces. It was the intervention that saved the revolution from its own mistakes and from a foe it could not defeat on its own. One victory was won by a former bandit in a red helmet who knew the mountains. The other was won by admirals who had never set foot in them. Both were necessary. Without Dervanakia, there would have been no revolution left to save by 1827. Without Navarino, Kolokotronis' guerrilla war would have ended in a slow, brutal defeat. Together, the pass and the bay tell the story of how Greece was reborn, through fire, blood, and the will of its own people, but ultimately secured by the cannons of foreign kings. The heroes of 1822 bought the time, and the fleets of 1827 cashed it in for a nation,